Hello, my friends. The September 11th attacks, also known as the 9/11 terrorist attacks, were a series of 4 coordinated terrorist assaults carried out by the Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda against the United States on the morning of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. Today, we will explore that terrifying tragedy. The United States of America is a symbol of economic power, representing an invincible military strength. However, there was once a day when America collapsed before a series of continuous attacks using airplanes. Who was behind this horrifying conspiracy? How did 4 commercial airplanes become living bombs? You will witness the entire detailed sequence of the September 11th terrorist attacks, a case that shocked the entire world, recreating every chilling moment and revealing untold mysteries. This was not merely a terrorist attack, it was the greatest case of the 21st century, a wake-up call, a pain that can never be forgotten. On the morning of September 11, 2001, America began in peace. The sky was clear, and the early sunlight spread across major cities. At Logan International Airport in Boston, around 5:45 a.m., Mohammed Atta, a 33-year-old Egyptian man, arrived at the American Airlines check-in counter. He wore a dark suit, carried a small suitcase, and held a ticket for American Airlines Flight 11, scheduled to depart at 7:45 a.m. for Los Angeles. Atta was accompanied by Abdulaziz Al-Omari, 22, a Saudi Arabian man with short hair and an unremarkable face. Both passed through security at 6:45 a.m. In their carry-on luggage, they carried folding knives, legal under U.S. aviation security regulations at the time, with blades shorter than 4 inches. The metal detectors didn't sound, and airport staff had no reason to be suspicious. Atta and Al-Omari boarded the plane, sitting in seats 8D and 8G in the business class cabin, blending in among 81 passengers and 11 crew members. Not far away, at Newark International Airport in New Jersey, Marwan al-Shehi, 23, from the United Arab Emirates, led a group of 5 hijackers onto United Airlines Flight 175. The flight left the gate at 8:14 a.m., also heading to Los Angeles. Shehi had studied flight training with Atta in Florida and had lived in the U.S. since 2000 under the guise of a student. That day he wore a white shirt and long pants, looking no different from any ordinary passenger. He passed through security at 7:35 a.m. with 4 accomplices, Fayez Bani Hamad, Mohand al-Shehri, Hamza al-Ghamdi, and Ahmed al-Ghamdi, all Saudi Arabian men aged between 20 and 28. They carried folding knives and pepper spray, small concealable items, but enough to subdue the flight crew in the confined space of an aircraft cabin. Airport security found nothing unusual. On this Boeing 767 were 56 passengers and 9 crew members beginning their morning. Peter Hansen, a 32-year-old passenger, called his father at 7:58 a.m. from a payphone at the airport, saying he was heading to California to see his wife and young daughter. Shehi and his group sat scattered in seats 2A, 2B, 9C, and 9D, maintaining a calm demeanor and speaking to no one. No one on board suspected that these young men carried deadly intentions. Farther south, at Washington Dulles International Airport in Virginia, Hani Hanjour, 29, a Saudi Arabian man, checked in for American Airlines Flight 77. This flight took off at 8:20 a.m. bound for Los Angeles. Hanjour was a trained pilot who had studied at flight schools in Arizona since 1996. He wore a light blue polo shirt and passed through security at 7:35 a.m. with 4 other hijackers, Khalid al-Mihdar, Majed Moked, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and Salem al-Hazmi, all from Saudi Arabia. They carried folding knives and passed inspection without trouble. The metal detector beeped when Moked went through, but after a hand search revealed nothing suspicious, he was allowed to continue. On board were 58 passengers and 6 crew members, including an elderly couple on vacation in California and a group of elementary school students from Washington, D.C. Hanjour sat in seat 1B, near the cockpit, hands gripping the seat's edge, eyes fixed forward. At Newark Airport, around the same time, Ziad Jarrah, 26, a Lebanese man, boarded United Airlines Flight 93. The flight left the gate at 8:42 a.m., 40 minutes late due to technical issues, heading for San Francisco. Jarrah had studied aerospace engineering at the Technical University of Munich in Germany and trained as a pilot in Florida since 2000. He wore a leather jacket and a baseball cap, looking like a typical Western youth. He passed through security at 7:39 a.m. with 3 other hijackers, Saeed Al-Ghamdi, Ahmed Al-Haznawi, and Ahmed Al-Nami, all from Saudi Arabia. They carried folding knives and pepper spray. Jarrah's carry-on bag was randomly inspected by airport staff, but contained only clothes and personal items, so he was cleared to continue. On this Boeing 757 were 37 passengers and 7 crew members chatting normally. Todd Beamer, a 32-year-old sales representative, called his wife from the airport at 7:45 a.m., saying he would be home late because of a flight delay. Jarrah sat in a front-row seat near the cockpit, preparing for his final mission, believed to be aimed at either the White House or the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. 4 flights, 19 hijackers, all in position. They blended in among the passengers, appearing no different from anyone else. U.S. aviation regulations at the time allowed folding knives shorter than 4 inches to be carried on planes, and security measures were still lax. After years without any major hijacking incidents, airport staff were busy processing hundreds of passengers per hour. They had neither time nor reason to suspect these young men. Atta, Shehi, Hanjour, Jarrah, and their accomplices had been thoroughly trained for months, even years, to blend in and wait for the moment to strike. America, on that morning of September 11th, was still enjoying peace before the nightmare arrived. The clock ticked minute by minute. In just a few hours, the sky would shake, black smoke would rise, and this day would change history forever. From a peaceful morning, America would fall into a nightmare in less than 2 hours. 4 commercial airplanes would be turned into weapons of mass destruction in an unprecedented terrorist attack that shook the entire world. Everything began at Logan International Airport in Boston, Massachusetts, where American Airlines Flight 11 was preparing for departure. A Boeing 767, registration number N334AA, rolled onto runway 4 at 7:59 a.m. This aircraft had a capacity of more than 150 passengers, but that day it carried only 81 people, including 5 hijackers and 11 crew members, on its usual route from Boston to Los Angeles International Airport. In the cockpit, Captain John Ogonowski, 50 years old, a veteran pilot, and First Officer Thomas McGuinness, 42 years old, a former U.S. Navy fighter pilot, smoothly handled the takeoff. Just 13 minutes later, at 8:12 a.m., the plane reached 26,000 feet, gliding over the green fields of central Massachusetts under the morning sunlight. Boston Air Traffic Control contacted them. American 11, turn right heading Aero 20, climb to 35,000 feet. Ogonowski replied briefly, confirming the turn. That was the last time his voice was heard over the radio. At 8:13 a.m., the calm in the cabin was shattered. Mohammed Atta suddenly stood up and signaled to his 4 accomplices, Abdulaziz al-Omari, Walid al-Shehri, Wael al-Shehri, and Satam al-Sukami, who were seated nearby. They pulled out small box cutters, steel utility knives about 10 centimeters long, legal under the lax aviation security rules of the time, and launched their attack. 2 flight attendants in the first-class cabin, Barbara Arestegui and Karen Martin, were attacked first. The hijackers attacked the flight attendants, injuring them and taking control of the cabin. Passenger Daniel Lewin, 31, seated in 9B near the cockpit, immediately stood up to intervene. A former member of Israel's elite Sayeret Matkal unit, Lewin had quick reflexes, but before he could react, Satam al-Sukami stabbed him from behind. Lewin was fatally attacked while trying to protect others, becoming the first victim of the hijacking. The hijackers used knives to threaten the remaining attendant, Amy Sweeney, forcing her to unlock the cockpit door using an emergency access code. Atta and Al-Omari rushed in, attacking Captain Oganowski and First Officer McGuinness. A brief struggle erupted in the cramped cockpit. The pilots fought back, but the hijackers managed to seize control of the cockpit. Atta, trained as a pilot in Florida, sat in the captain's seat, while Al-Omari tied the two unconscious or possibly dead pilots to the auxiliary seats. In the passenger cabin, the other three hijackers, Walid, Whale, and Satam, shouted in Arabic, brandishing knives and a device resembling a bomb with wires exposed, making threats. "Sit down. Nobody move." They forced the 76 remaining passengers to move to the rear of the aircraft, where cries and prayers began to fill the air. At 8:16 a.m., Atta lowered the plane's altitude to 29,000 feet, deviating from the westward route toward Los Angeles. At Boston Air Traffic Control, controllers suddenly heard screaming over the cockpit microphone, which had been left open. One controller exclaimed, "What the hell is going on?" At 8:21 a.m., Atta turned off the plane's transponder, the Mode C beacon that transmitted altitude and position, with a simple switch on the control panel, causing the aircraft to vanish from civilian radar. ATC called repeatedly. "American 11, this is Boston. Please respond. American 11, do you hear me?" But only chilling silence came back. In the passenger cabin, flight attendants Amy Sweeney and Betty Ong, though terrified, secretly used the airphone attached to the seatbacks to call American Airlines headquarters. Sweeney's trembling voice said, "This is Amy, flight attendant on Flight 11. We've been attacked. Barbara and Karen have been stabbed. We can't get into the cockpit. The door is locked. Someone's been stabbed in first class, possibly passenger number 9. They have knives and a bomb." The call lasted several minutes, providing critical information to the ground, but it could not change their fate. At 8:24 a.m., Atta accidentally pressed the radio button to communicate with ATC instead of the cabin intercom. His voice came through. "Nobody move. Everything will be okay. We are returning to the airport. Just stay quiet." His low, cold voice echoed through Boston Air Traffic Control, leaving controllers stunned. The plane's been hijacked. At 8:26, Atta increased the plane's speed, turning south toward Manhattan, New York. He made a second transmission at 8:33, again accidentally to ATC. "We are returning to the airport. Don't do anything stupid." Now flying at a lower altitude, the aircraft cut through thin clouds toward the horizon, where the skyscrapers of New York City began to appear. At 8:46 a.m., the Boeing 767 crashed directly into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, between the 93rd and 99th floors at a speed of 750 km/h, about 440 m/h. The catastrophic impact shook the 110-story tower. 38,000 liters of jet fuel exploded into a massive fireball, engulfing all 92 people on board, passengers, crew, and hijackers, along with hundreds of office workers inside the building. Flames and black smoke billowed violently. More than 1,000 people were trapped above the impact zone, with no escape route. Many were trapped above the impact zone, facing unimaginable choices as smoke and flames spread. On the ground, New Yorkers stared upward in disbelief. At first, many thought it was just a small aircraft accident, but the truth was far worse. Only 15 minutes earlier, from the same Logan Airport, United Airlines Flight 175, another Boeing 767-222, registration N60UA, had taken off at 8:14 a.m., also bound for Los Angeles. The plane carried 56 passengers, including 5 hijackers and 9 crew members, piloted by Captain Victor Saraceni and First Officer Michael Horrocks. After leaving the runway, the aircraft climbed to a cruising altitude of 33,000 feet at 8:37, flying parallel to the path of Flight 11. Boston ATC radioed, "United 175, do you see American 11? Saraceni replied, "Yes, we see it at 29,000 feet, not far away." At 8:41, the pilot reported again, "We're hearing unusual sounds from American 11. Could be a hijacking. But shortly after, at 8:43, their own cockpit became a battlefield. 5 hijackers, led by Marwan al-Shehi, a 23-year-old pilot trained at Hoffman Aviation School in Florida, suddenly stood up from their seats. They drew knives and rushed forward. Flight attendant Kathy Lemmer, in the first-class cabin, was stabbed in the back as she tried to block the way, collapsing in the aisle with a scream. Al-Shehi and another hijacker stormed the cockpit, attacking Captain Saraceni and First Officer Horrocks. Saraceni tried to hold the yoke but was stabbed repeatedly in the chest. Horrocks, 38, fought back, punching one hijacker in the face but was overpowered and killed. Al-Shehi, with months of flight training, sat in the captain's seat while his accomplice tied up the 2 unconscious pilots. In the passenger cabin, the other 3 hijackers, Fayez Bani Hamad, Mohand al-Shehri, and Hamza al-Ghamdi, waved knives and a bomb-like device, shouting, "Sit down, don't move." They forced 51 passengers and crew members to move toward the rear of the aircraft, where the cries of children and the prayers of adults mingled in the suffocating air. The plane deviated from its original route, and communication with New York Air Traffic Control was completely lost. At 8:52 a.m., flight attendant Robert Fangman, 33 years old, secretly used the airphone to call United Airlines maintenance offices in San Francisco. "This is Fangman, Flight 175. We've been hijacked. People have been attacked. The cockpit has been taken." The call lasted 1 minute and 15 seconds before being abruptly cut off, possibly because the hijackers discovered it. At 8:58, the plane flew over New Jersey at an altitude of 28,500 feet, slicing through white clouds and accelerating toward New York. Over the next 5 minutes, it descended rapidly from 28,500 feet to just a few thousand, causing passengers to feel violent jolts. The aircraft narrowly avoided a mid-air collision with Delta Flight 2315, forcing the Delta pilot to make a sharp turn to prevent disaster. On the ground, air traffic controller Dave Bottiglia shouted into the radio, "United 175, turn back immediately." But there was no response. At 9:03 a.m., the Boeing 767 crashed directly into the south tower of the World Trade Center between the 77th and 85th floors at a speed of 800 km/h, about 500 mph. The impact tore through the building's steel structure. 38,000 liters of jet fuel exploded instantly, killing all 65 people on board and hundreds inside the offices. Thick black smoke rose, mingling with the smoke from the North Tower, turning New York's sky into a dark shroud. While the entire nation sank into panic over the 2 consecutive attacks in New York, another plane, American Airlines Flight 77, had taken off from Washington Dulles International Airport in Northern Virginia at 8:20 a.m. It was a Boeing 757-223, registration N644AA, carrying 58 passengers, including 5 hijackers and 6 crew members, piloted by Captain Charles Burlingame, 51, a former Navy pilot, and First Officer David Charlebois. The flight proceeded normally over Ohio, gliding above golden cornfields in the morning sunlight, until 8:51 a.m., when the 5 hijackers led by Hani Hanjour began their assault. Hanjour stood up from his first-class seat with his 4 accomplices, Khalid al-Mihdar, Majid Moked, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and Salem al-Hazmi. They drew knives and charged toward the cockpit. Flight attendant Renee May tried to block the way, but was stabbed in the abdomen, collapsing in the aisle with a scream. Hanjour and al-Mihdar stormed into the cockpit, attacking Captain Burlingame and First Officer Charlebois. Burlingame, with his military experience, fought back fiercely, punching Hanjour in the face, but was stabbed from behind by Moked. Charlebois tried to hit the emergency alert button, but didn't make it before being killed. Within 3 minutes, the hijackers had complete control of the plane. In the passenger cabin, the remaining 3 hijackers forced 53 passengers and attendants to move to the rear. At 8:54, Hanjour turned off the transponder, activated the autopilot, and redirected the aircraft eastward toward Washington, D.C. Their target was the Pentagon, the headquarters of the U.S. Department of Defense, a symbol of America's military power. From 9:17 to 9:22, Hanjo's voice came over the cabin intercom, low and calm. "The plane has been hijacked. Don't resist. We will land safely after we get our ransom." It was a lie to keep the passengers quiet while they were trapped at the back with no escape. Despite being injured, flight attendant Renee May secretly called American Airlines. "This is Renee. Flight 77 has been hijacked. They have knives." At 9:29, Hanjo disengaged the autopilot and switched to manual control, accelerating to 550 km/h while rapidly descending from 35,000 feet to just a few thousand. The plane skimmed over forests and fields of Virginia, shaking violently as Hanjo adjusted the course. At 9:37, only 0.8 kilometers from the Pentagon, Hanjo performed a 330-degree clockwise spiral at an altitude of 670 meters, a complex maneuver requiring advanced pilot training. He pushed the throttles to full power, crashing the Boeing 757 into the western side of the Pentagon at a 42-degree angle. The impact tore through the thick concrete walls. 23,000 liters of jet fuel exploded into a massive fireball, killing all 64 people on board, passengers, crew, and hijackers, along with 125 people inside the building, including both military and civilian personnel. The fire spread rapidly, and thick black smoke billowed upward, destroying a large section of America's most important defense headquarters. After this attack, the entire U.S. airspace was ordered closed. But one last plane ignored the command, continuing to spread terror across the sky. The fourth aircraft, United Airlines Flight 93, took off from Newark International Airport in New Jersey at 8:42 a.m., 42 minutes behind schedule due to airport congestion. It was a Boeing 757-222, registration N591UA, carrying 37 passengers, including 4 hijackers and 7 crew members, piloted by Captain Jason Dahl, 43, and First Officer Leroy Homer, 36, a former U.S. Air Force pilot, heading for San Francisco. The plane climbed to a cruising altitude of 35,000 feet at 9:03 a.m., exactly when Flight 175 struck the South Tower of the World Trade Center. Cleveland Air Traffic Control radioed, "United 93, beware of cockpit intrusions. 2 planes have hit the World Trade Center." The crew replied, "Roger that, we'll be vigilant." But they didn't know that 4 hijackers, Ziad Jarrah, Saeed Al-Ghamdi, Ahmed Al-Nami, and Ahmed Al-Haznawi, were already seated in first class and business class, silently observing. At 9:28, as the plane flew over eastern Ohio, Jarrah, 26, a trained pilot from Florida, stood up and signaled his accomplices. They drew knives and stormed towards the cockpit. Flight attendant Deborah Welsh tried to block them, but was stabbed in the chest, collapsing in the aisle. Jarrah and Al-Ghamdi burst into the cockpit, attacking Captain Dahl and First Officer Homer. A fierce struggle broke out. Dahl shouted, "Get out!" while gripping the controls, and Homer punched Jarrah in the face. But both were soon overpowered. Homer was stabbed multiple times and fell to the floor, while Dahl was tied up and dragged out. Jarrah took the captain's seat. In the passenger cabin, the other 2 hijackers, Al-Nami and Al-Haznawi, forced the 33 remaining passengers and attendants to the rear. At 9:31, Jarrah turned on the cabin intercom, but accidentally transmitted to Cleveland ATC instead. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We have a bomb on board. Stay quiet." His voice echoed through the control room on the ground, terrifying the staff. "United 93 has been hijacked." 2 minutes later, when Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon at 9:39, Jarrah made another announcement. "The plane will return to the airport. Don't do anything." But the passengers had already learned about the earlier attacks through more than 37 phone calls made via airphones and cell phones. They realized they weren't just facing death. They were being used as weapons to kill thousands more on the ground. They made a silent agreement through glances and whispers. They had to take the plane back. At 9:52, the passengers and crew, including Beamer, Bingham, Glick, Tom Burnett, and flight attendant Sandra Bradshaw, organized a counterattack. Bradshaw boiled water from the coffee maker to use as a weapon. They gathered food carts, plastic knives, fire extinguishers, anything they could use, and shouted, "Are you ready? Okay, let's roll." A group of more than 10 people charged forward, ramming the carts into the 2 hijackers in the passenger cabin. The passengers fought bravely to retake the cockpit, using anything they could find to resist the hijackers. Screams and thuds filled the cabin. The plane shook violently as Jara, in the cockpit, sensed the threat. He maneuvered sharply left and right, trying to throw the attackers off balance. But the resistance didn't stop. They broke down the cockpit door with a food cart and charged at Jara and Al-Ghamdi. At 10:03 a.m., realizing his accomplices were dead, Jara pushed the control yoke forward to its maximum. The plane nosedived at a speed of 960 km/h, about 563 mph. The Boeing 757 crashed upside down into a deserted field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, just 20 minutes from Washington, D.C. The impact created a crater 10 meters deep. Flames and smoke rose skyward, killing all 44 people on board, passengers, crew, and hijackers. The brave actions of the passengers and crew prevented Jara from reaching his target, believed to be the U.S. Capitol or the White House, saving thousands of lives on the ground. After the 4 hijacked planes struck their targets, America fell into an unprecedented nightmare in modern history. After the 4 hijacked planes struck their targets, America fell into an unprecedented nightmare in modern history. Only 56 minutes after the first attack on the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46, the South Tower began to collapse at 9:59. The 110-story tower, a symbol of America's economic power, was severely damaged by the crash of United Airlines Flight 175. The Boeing 767 had slammed into floors 77 through 85 at nearly 950 km/h, carrying 10,000 gallons of jet fuel. The explosion ignited massive fires, with core temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees, hot enough to melt the steel support columns, which were designed to withstand only about 600 degrees. Concrete shattered under pressure, and within 10 short seconds, the massive structure crumbled onto the streets of Manhattan. The sound of the collapse resembled an earthquake, shaking all of lower Manhattan. A thick white cloud of dust, containing asbestos from insulation, shattered glass, and toxic microparticles from burning furniture, blanketed the area, turning day into night for several minutes. Survivors fled in panic, covering their faces with sleeves, scarves, or anything they could find to avoid inhaling the choking dust. Firefighters, police officers, and rescue workers, those who had rushed into the towers right after the attack to save others, never made it out. More than 400 of them were buried beneath millions of tons of debris made of steel, glass, and concrete. Just 29 minutes later, at 10:28, the North Tower also collapsed in the same way. The impact of American Airlines Flight 11 into floors 93 through 99 had destroyed the main stairwells and sprinkler systems, trapping more than 300 people on the upper floors with no way out. As the second tower fell, a thunderous roar echoed across New York, and the mix of smoke and ash covered the sky. A total of 2,753 people died at Ground Zero, including 343 firefighters, 60 police officers, 8 medical personnel, and thousands of office workers, tourists, and residents. The 16-acre area turned into a mountain of wreckage, with fires smoldering under layers of concrete and steel for more than 100 days, finally extinguished in December of that same year. Farther south in Washington, D.C., the Pentagon was still engulfed in flames after the attack by American Airlines Flight 77 at 9:37. The Boeing 757 had struck the western face of the building, an area that had just been renovated with thicker concrete walls and blast-resistant windows. but the force of 10,000 gallons of jet fuel, combined with a speed of 850 km/h, pierced 3 of the building's 5 rings, creating a hole 30 meters wide. The impact killed 125 people inside, 70 civilians, from secretaries to contractors, and 55 military personnel, along with everyone on the plane, passengers, crew, and 5 hijackers. The fire spread for hours, fueled by jet fuel and office materials, sending a column of black smoke hundreds of meters high, visible from miles away. More than 100 people were injured, many suffering severe burns or inhaling toxic fumes from burning plastic, metal, and chemicals. Fire departments from Arlington County and surrounding areas worked tirelessly to extinguish the blaze, while surviving military and civilian staff ran out of the wreckage, coughing violently in the suffocating air. The Pentagon, a symbol of America's military might, where more than 23,000 people worked daily, had been attacked on its own soil, plunging the Department of Defense into a state of high alert. Government agencies in Washington, D.C. began immediate evacuations from the White House to the Capitol building, while the military ordered the entire area into lockdown. The U.S. Air Force scrambled F-16 fighter jets from Andrews Air Force Base to patrol the skies over the East Coast. But by then, all efforts were too late to prevent the catastrophe that had already unfolded. At Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where United Airlines Flight 93 crashed at 10:03 a.m., a quiet yet heartbreaking scene appeared. The Boeing 757 had slammed into an empty field at over 900 kilometers, creating a crater 10 meters deep and 30 meters wide. No one among the 44 people aboard, 37 passengers, 7 crew members, and 4 hijackers, survived. Wreckage ranging from massive engine parts to passenger seats and luggage was scattered over an area of more than 8 square miles, and the acrid smell of burning fuel lingered in the air for hours. There was no damage on the ground beyond the impact site, but this crash carried special meaning. The brave actions of the passengers and crew, led by people like Todd Beamer, Jeremy Glick, and Mark Bingham, prevented the hijackers led by Ziad Jarrah from completing their mission, believed to be the White House or the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. About 20 minutes' flight away, the field in Shanksville became an unexpected grave. Later, a memorial was built there with the names of all 40 passengers and crew carved into white stone, honoring their sacrifice. The consequences of September 11th were immeasurable, both in human lives and material loss. A total of 2,877 people were killed, not counting the 19 hijackers, and more than 6,000 were injured across the 3 attack sites. In New York, the human loss was greatest, 2,133 victims, including those who jumped from the towers in despair. At least 200 such cases were documented through photos and eyewitness accounts. The Pentagon lost 184 people, and Shanksville recorded 44 deaths. The U.S. economy suffered a massive shock. The stock market closed from September 11th to September 17th, the first time since World War I. When trading resumed, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 684 points, a record one-day drop at the time, equivalent to 7%, wiping out $1.4 trillion in market value. Civil aviation was completely paralyzed, with more than 4,000 flights cancelled on September 11th, and all U.S. airspace shut down for 3 days, an unprecedented measure. Over 200,000 jobs were lost in New York as businesses around Ground Zero collapsed, from banks to small shops. Tens of thousands lost their homes or were forced to evacuate from Lower Manhattan, which had become a wasteland of smoke and debris. The air in Manhattan turned toxic, contaminated by asbestos from insulation, chemical vapors from burning computers and furniture, and microscopic particles of pulverized steel and concrete. More than 18,000 first responders, firefighters, police, and volunteers were later diagnosed with respiratory diseases such as asthma, pneumonia, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease from exposure to the toxic dust at Ground Zero. By 2021, at least 100 rescue workers were confirmed to have developed cancers related to the toxins, from lung cancer to leukemia, a lingering legacy of that fateful day. America, once proud of its invulnerability and unmatched power, now faced fear, loss, and a deep wound in the nation's soul, not only for those directly affected, but also for the millions who watched it all unfold on live television. From the ashes, mysteries began to surface, raising the question of how such a large-scale attack could happen on American soil. On the very day of September 11th, U.S. intelligence officials suspected al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization led by Osama bin Laden, to be behind the attacks. By that evening, the CIA confirmed that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a senior al-Qaeda operative, was the principal architect. The later report by the 9/11 Commission, released in 2004, revealed that the plan had originated in 1996, when Mohammed met bin Laden in Afghanistan and proposed the idea of using civilian airplanes as weapons. By 1999, 19 hijackers, 15 from Saudi Arabia, 2 from the United Arab Emirates, 1 from Egypt, and 1 from Lebanon, had been selected from hundreds of candidates, trained at flight schools in Florida, Arizona, and Oklahoma, and lived quietly in U.S. cities such as San Diego, Boston, and Patterson for months without detection. They used legal visas, rented homes, opened bank accounts, and attended flying lessons without arousing suspicion. But why didn't America stop them? The 9/11 Commission report pointed to a series of failures in intelligence and security. The CIA had tracked Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi since January 2000, when they attended an al-Qaeda meeting in Malaysia. The agency knew they entered the U.S. on January 15, 2000, through Los Angeles, but never informed the FBI or immigration authorities. By August 2001, the CIA finally added them to the watch list. But it was too late. Both were already preparing for the attack. In July 2001, FBI agent Kenneth Williams in Phoenix sent a memo, later known as the Phoenix Memo, warning about Middle Eastern men attending flight schools in Arizona, suspecting links to terrorism, and recommending investigation of flight schools nationwide. But the memo was ignored by superiors and never shared with other agencies. On August 6, 2001, President George W. Bush received his daily intelligence briefing from the CIA, titled "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S." The 1.5-page report mentioned the possibility of aircraft hijackings and suspicious al-Qaeda activity, but contained no specific time or location and prompted no immediate action from the White House. Aviation security was a major vulnerability. Folding knives under 4 inches were allowed on board under FAA rules, and airport security personnel were not trained to detect threats from suicidal hijackers, a concept unheard of in U.S. aviation history. The lack of coordination between the CIA, FBI, and other agencies, combined with the underestimation of al-Qaeda's threat, created the conditions for the tragedy to unfold without any timely warning. September 11th was not just a disaster, it was a historic turning point that changed America and the world forever. America lost its sense of safety and no longer viewed itself as invincible against external threats. The world witnessed the beginning of a new era of conflict, with the war on terror spreading from Afghanistan to Iraq and beyond. The mysteries of intelligence failures, from ignored CIA and FBI warnings to the unpreparedness of airport security, became costly lessons, driving sweeping reforms in the U.S. national security system. The courage of the passengers on Flight 93, those who sacrificed themselves to prevent a greater catastrophe, was remembered as a symbol of resilience. And the pain of millions, from victims' families to those who watched through their television screens, still echoes through time, never fading. From the ruins of the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and the Shanksville field, one question remains. How can such a thing be prevented again? The answer, even now, remains a long and unfinished journey, a journey marked by lessons paid for with the blood and tears of thousands of innocents, leaving behind a legacy both tragic and steadfast in human history. Please subscribe to the channel to follow the next part, the manhunt for the world's most notorious terrorist Osama bin Laden. And for now, goodbye. See you again in the next cases.